Hi everyone, this is our lesson about animal farming and veganism, and we'll talk a bit about the ethics of using other animals for food, clothing, etc. I wanted to inform you that we are halfway toward the end of this seminar about environment and society and environmental ethics. I know that you have already done a lot. In the previous lessons, my teaching assistant, Anna, taught you about ecofeminism and environmental racism. And in the last one, she was teaching the concept of the Anthropocene, following also the important work of feminist philosopher Donna Haraway. So I'm thrilled that she taught you this part because it can be controversial, but undoubtedly is essential to give a broader and deeper dimension to our reflection and our conversation. I think that thanks to the skills that you gained by engaging with the literature of ecofeminism and the one of environmental justice, you can better understand all the reflections we have made so far when it comes to exploitation of non-human animals and exploitation of nature. And I do believe that it is time to go back to the part in which we talk about animal ethics and this usage of non-human animals. But before delving into it, I would like to say something more about the assignments. You so far have done 3 assignments, 3 discussions. The last one was about environmental justice and ecofeminism. I think that is important to say again that if you do not agree with the philosophies that we are presenting, if you do not agree with some of the positions that we are teaching, it doesn't mean that you cannot express yourself fully. I think that the goal of this class is not to teach you what to think, but is to teach you about how to think. And this is really important. There is a big difference. We both want, as your teachers, to think with your head, but to ground your thoughts in empirical evidences. And we want for you to be able to reflect and use logical and valid arguments while you're expressing yourself on a subject. And most importantly, we want you to be respectful toward your peers and toward other people and other people's sensibilities. So, having said that, I do encourage you to express yourself freely, politely, and to think deeper about the various topics we are facing in this class, because the goal at the end of the day is to form not only students, but mostly to form human subjects, citizens, and not just workers. So, having said that, for today, you are supposed to read an article from George Monbiot, an environmental writer, and this article is about the technologies related to future food production, specifically precise fermentation. That is a technique that can potentially, in the future, the next future, replace most of our production of proteins through, for example, animal domestication and animal farmings. So I think that just to partially as a curiosity, partially because food is something that we experience on a daily basis, I think that it's a really interesting article that you can read to have an overview about one of the most promising technologies that we are going to see developing in our society and that can potentially shape the future of food. For this very purpose, there is on Canvas also a conference of George Monbiot connected to his latest book, Regenesis, that talks specifically about the necessity for a food revolution, because our current food system struggles to cope with the fact that there are 8 billion humans on the planet, 8 billion humans on the planet, and that most of them are highly engaged in the consumption of meat and animal products, and that most of these products are unsustainable on a planet that is dominated by us as a species, and sustainable on a planet that is threatened by climate change, by biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, water pollution, soil erosion, and so on. All those kind of environmental issues that characterize the Anthropocene, the geological epoch that you already faced in the previous lesson. I wanted to mostly focus on veganism because I think that most of the time in the conversation about how to change our diet, the most interesting proposal is the one of veganism, probably also the most radical. Veganism and just partially vegetarianism. Why so? Because contrary to other approaches that promote, for example, consuming more local or being more aware about your products, veganism do not deny the possibility to go local, do not deny the possibility to be more aware about the people that you are taking the food from, or about the labor conditions, etc. But is also a little bit stricter because it excludes the usage of animals, at least direct usage of animals, to produce commodities for us. Basically, veganism, basing on a philosophy of animal liberations or animal rights, is promoting the possibility of a world in which we will not base not just our food system, but also most of our industry on the active exploitation of billions of non-humans. So I decided that it was important to talk about veganism. I do not hide the fact that I'm a vegan as well since at least 10 years. This, however, is not a class about nutrition. I'm not an expert of the subject. I have a certain degree of knowledge for my personal experience and because I read a lot about it, but I'm not here to give any kind of advice or any kind of specific consideration about the health of the vegan choice. You can check into the literature by yourself. But I provided you many information about the environmental impact of a vegan diet or a plant-based diet compared to a normal diet, an omnivore diet, or a high-intensity meat consumption diet. So I think that it's really interesting to consider the data, but it's also interesting to consider the ethical dimension. For this very reason, I asked you today to read the article of Lori Gruen. And the article of Gruen, she divides two kinds of veganism. The veganism that is something like an identity veganism, an identitarian movement that say, I am vegan, therefore I perform this way and I'm different from other people. And this kind of veganism can be dangerous because the veganism that creates a divide, an ethical divide between people, creating the good from one side and the bad people on the other side. And this sometimes goes against the possibility of engaging the broader public for more sensibility, for example, toward non-human animals and toward the exploitation of the environment and non-human animals. On the other hand, there is veganism as an aspiration, and both of this kind of veganism can be political and ethical. But in the second case, we acknowledge the fact that we cannot live without killing, because this is the human condition, but is also the condition of every living being. Therefore, what is possible to do is not to reach perfection, not to identify as something superior by being vegan, for example, but is to criticize the system and try to engage actively toward softer forms of exploitation, and step by step try to undo the system, the anthropocentric machine, the anthropocentric and dominant system of human supremacy toward the rest of the living world. So basically, if we embrace veganism as a phenomena, as a philosophy, to criticize basically the massive exploitation of non-humans, this can give us better results rather than assuming veganism as something like an identity choice. And I think that the reflection that you will find, and that probably you have already found in the article of Gruen, can be stimulating to think in a more um, in a more eclectic and in a more responsible and nuanced way about the fact of being vegan, or talking with vegan, or engaging with veganism at many different levels. What I want you to think about is not to think about veganism as the only possible choice. It is undoubtedly a valuable choice. There are many reasons why you could and should go vegan. On the other hand, I think that the goal of this class is not to preach something specifically, but to make you reflect about the possibility of doing things better. Because, as I said in previous lessons, this undoubtedly is not the best of the possible world. And therefore, I think that the article of Gruen is a great article because it's not preaching you a perfect standard of life, a perfect, not standard of life, a perfect way of behaving. It's not seeking perfection, but is suggesting and hinting the possibility of criticizing the current system of exploitation of non-human animals, the current system of food and commodities production. Is a critique that allows for people not being perfect and not being all at the same levels, and it doesn't matter if we are not all equally capable of engaging with, for example, a plant-based diet. What matters the most is that we are all trying to not justify an exploitative system, but we are engaging with its problematics. So I think that Gruen is with a very easy and accessible vocabulary and syntax, explaining us how we can think about veganism not as something assertive, not as something completely that you join or not, but as something more shady, but in a certain sense also more stimulating. On my side, I feel like being vegan is probably one of the most radical choices and most positive choices we can make to reduce our carbon footprint and our ecological footprint, at the same time em- embodying and with our bodies criticizing actively as individuals the system of production that is based on extractivism and is based on anthropocentrism and is based on human supremacy. Yet you can also not agree with me and not agree with Gruen. That's not a problem. That's not an issue. But I would like you to think deeply about the fact that we give as an assumption the possibility of using billions of non-humans for the sake of most of the time just taste and not a real material necessity to feed ourselves. Because as you will see by reading Gruen, by reading Monbiot, by checking into the information that I provided you, we can do without. Maybe not all of us, but the vast majority of us can do without eating meat and can do without eating animal products, and can do without using animal products in many fields of production, if not all. So knowing this and keeping this in mind, it becomes problematic just simply accepting the fact that we use animals that can experience pleasure and pain, can have interest, as we have seen with Peter Singer and in the lesson about animal ethics. It is problematic. Therefore, we need to think better about our dietary choices. Now I will try to see if it's possible to share with you some information that you can find that you can find easily in our canvas. So first of all, it's good to recap and saying that animal agriculture presents several problematic issues. There is an environmental impact because animal agriculture is a significant contributor to environmental degradation, like deforestation, water pollution, and greenhouse emissions. There is a problem related to animal welfare. Many animal agriculture practices involve the mistreatment and the suffering of animals, especially in factory farming operations, and the inhumane treatment of animals has raised concern about animal welfare and prompted many individuals to adopt plant-based diets and advocate for animal rights because the conditions of animals are really horrible most of the time, if not all the time. Then there is for sure ethics, because this is a class about ethics. So the use of animals for food production undoubtedly raises ethical and moral questions about if we can actually treat animals as mere means and not as end in themselves. Then there is for sure the aspect of human health, because animal agriculture can have a negative health impact on humans, and the risk of zoonotic diseases is one of them. Think about COVID-19 and think about many other zoonotic diseases that are out there, and this is not something we will delve into it, but it's something to consider. And then there is for sure there are also economic concerns, because for example, animal agriculture most of the time depends on financial resources coming from government subsidies, and it's something that George Monbiot in the past has analyzed very well, especially in the case of the UK, and I can tell you that it's the same in the EU and the US. Even though for sure there are varieties, there are differences in the approaches that governments have toward the backing of a certain animal agriculture, yet it is undeniable that sometimes farmers are literally farming subsidies. Then there is a problem of environmental impacts of food and agriculture. As I said before, you can find this information in our World in Data. That is one of the best resources if you want to know better the numbers behind a certain consideration. And among many things, we can say that 26% of greenhouse gas emission come from food, and 26%. And in this side, there is a lot that is connected to animal agriculture. And I linked you a video that summarizes very well the why meat is so fundamental when it comes to increasing the number of greenhouse gas emissions derived from food. And for example, I put from our World in Data an image describing greenhouse gas emission per kilogram of food product, and beef and lamb and cheese and pig meat are much more damaging from an environmental viewpoint in terms of gas emission compared to many other many other vegan products. Undoubtedly, there are differences even in vegan products, because rice is much more polluting in terms of CO2 emissions compared to potatoes or nuts. But despite differences, there is overall a huge difference between animal products and vegetable products. And in terms of mammal biodiversity, it's stunning to considering it's amazing from a negative perspective to think that 96% of global mammal biomass is livestock, if you exclude humans. So basically, there is a vast majority of mammal biomass that is basically consisting in the animals that we use for food and we use for other as resource overall. And we can see that there are many reasons why animal products can be problematic for an environmental viewpoint. one of these factors, for example, is water consumption, and bovine meat is undoubtedly the most consuming form of food production, even though undoubtedly we cannot take just one number when we talk about bovine production, bovine meat. We are talking about the average, because then there are different ways in which you can farm, different ways in which you can grow food, etc. So we are always talking about average. And when we say that the vegan diet is overall better from an environmental viewpoint compared to an omnivore or highly carnist diet, we are always talking about average. Then there are many ways in which you can have a better or a worse vegan diet, or a better and a worse omnivore diet. So think about it as general data. Don't think about them like there are no exceptions. Okay, this is really important. You need always to keep in mind the distinction between average and outliers, and to keep in mind there are differences in the methodology and the areas in which you farm and the areas in which you cultivate, the technologies that you employ, and for example the standard of animal welfare that you want to respect. So there are always many differences, and it's really important to reflect on them and not to consider food as something that we give as an assumption in our everyday life without ever questioning where food comes from, because food production is one of the biggest industry worldwide, and we need to be aware of which kind of food and the cost, the environmental cost, the labor cost, but also the ethical cost, not just in terms of environmental ethics and human ethics, but also in the sense of animal ethics and the consideration if it's legitimate or not to use sentient animals for the sake of producing food when we have maybe viable alternatives. And when I'm talking about viable alternatives, I don't just mean vegetables, but maybe we need to think about the way in which we treat animals in case new technologies will soon replace the traditional way of farming animals. I don't know, cultivated meat, for example, but also precise fermentation, the one investigated by George Monbiot. So that's it for today. I wish you a good Wednesday, and I hope that you will have the time to reflect on all the issue we have just briefly discussed. You can find many data and many information. If you go on your Canvas page, you will find the article of Gruen, and you will find the article of George Monbiot, and you can express freely your opinion once that you are informed a little bit more about the data and a little bit more about the facts. Remember that you can politely disagree. You don't have to agree with everything that we are presenting, but you need to keep in mind the data, and you need to develop your own ideas, but you need to do it backing them with good arguments and solid argumentations. Thanks a lot, and see you on Friday, when we will talk briefly about human overpopulation as a potential problem. Still, you can agree or not, but we will present it as a potential problem. See you on Friday.